For decades, the United States was considered the land of opportunity, a place where the American dream seemed within everyone's reach. However, the current reality for many is quite different. Growing social inequality has turned what were once thriving urban areas into zones where poverty is more the rule than the exception. San Francisco, historically one of the most prosperous and coveted cities in the United States, famous for its innovative culture and entrepreneurial spirit, has experienced a drastic decline in recent years. Rising social inequality, the high cost of living, and the acute housing crisis have made this iconic metropolis an almost unlivable place for many of its inhabitants. In 2024, the situation in San Francisco has worsened further. Tent cities continue to expand, and persistent problems of human waste and pests remain unresolved. The feeling of insecurity is growing among residents, many of whom have decided to leave the city in search of better living conditions elsewhere. Income inequality remains a critical issue, with cities like New Orleans showing a large gap between top earners and those with the lowest incomes. This disparity can affect everything from access to housing to overall quality of life. In addition, immigration continues to be a divisive issue, with many cities struggling to manage the increase in migrants and the costs associated with their integration and well-being. Mental health has also emerged as a growing crisis, particularly exacerbated by the isolation and economic hardships of the pandemic, disproportionately affecting young people and creating a worrying outlook for the future of these urban populations. Los Angeles, which once symbolized the glamour and prosperity of the United States West Coast, has undergone a drastic transformation in recent years. The city, now marked by poverty and chaos, invested more than $620 million in 2021 in programs to help the homeless population. However, despite these significant efforts, the number of people living on the streets grew by 16%. By 2024, the situation has not shown any improvement. Los Angeles residents continue to face severe problems related to homelessness, rising crime, and the deterioration of public infrastructure. Tents have become a common sight, not only in the city center but also in residential neighborhoods. In addition, reports of the spread of diseases such as typhoid fever, due to unsanitary conditions, continue to increase, further exacerbating the crisis. The mass exodus from cities, increasingly palpable in the United States, has marked a growing trend in recent years, and upon reaching 2024, has reached record numbers. People are leaving cities behind to seek a safer and more affordable life in suburban or rural areas. This migration is driven by several critical factors. Among them, the high cost of living in metropolises like New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles pushes many to seek new homes in states with a lower cost of living, such as Texas, Arizona, or Florida. In addition, insecurity becomes an additional reason to move, with many opting for smaller communities where crime rates are considerably lower. At the heart of American cities, a perfect storm of economic and social problems is shaping the new urban landscape. Migration, a phenomenon that has transformed the demographics of entire cities, is at the forefront of these changes. From South America and the Caribbean, a growing number of people have arrived in the United States, seeking refuge from the economic adversity and violence of their countries of origin. Cities like Chicago and New York, known for their sanctuary policies, have seen their resources stretched to the limit, struggling to provide basic services from housing to legal assistance for these new residents. This situation has sparked a heated debate about the responsibility of the federal government versus local governments. While some cities are implementing their own solutions, such as the mobilization of the National Guard to border communities by the Arizona government, other states like Texas have passed laws criminalizing illegal entry, exacerbating political and social tensions. Parallel to these migratory challenges, the economy of the largest cities remains a critical point of discussion. Although cities like Austin and Provo have shown remarkable growth, the shadows of economic inequality loom ominously over many others. In places like New Orleans and Newark, income disparity is palpable, with the wealthiest earning up to 7 times more than those in the lowest income quintile, highlighting a division that goes beyond the monetary, affecting access to essential services such as education and health. The economic crisis has not only affected the social structure of cities, but has also modified the urban fabric itself. Urban development and affordable housing policies are constantly evolving, trying to adapt to a reality where inequality and economic insecurity dictate the daily agenda of millions. In this scenario, American cities are at a turning point, where today's decisions will define the character and viability of tomorrow's metropolises. The economic state of major U.S. cities is at a crossroads, where economic inequality and the uneven post-pandemic recovery stand out among the most pressing challenges. The economies of these metropolises, traditional engines of growth, have been deeply affected by fluctuations in labor markets and persistent inflation that has undermined the purchasing power of many citizens. As inflation rates continue to be a significant problem, the cost of living in cities like San Francisco and New York reaches levels that many of their residents find unsustainable. This situation has fueled a broader discussion about the need for policy interventions that can offer some relief, such as rent controls or housing subsidies. The economies of these cities are also impacted by unemployment rates, which, although they have improved since the peaks of the pandemic, still reflect an incomplete recovery. Sectors such as services and hospitality, crucial for many of these large cities, are still struggling to return to pre-pandemic employment levels. In addition, the issue of internal migration and labor mobility has introduced new dynamics into the urban labor market. With a growing number of people choosing to work remotely, many cities face a transformation in their local economies, which traditionally depended on a workforce physically concentrated in dense urban spaces. This complex economic tapestry requires a multifaceted approach to its management, which not only addresses the immediate symptoms of inequality and inflation, but also focuses on long-term solutions that promote greater equity and economic sustainability. The decisions made today about how to revitalize these urban economies will have a lasting impact on their ability to attract and retain a diverse and vibrant population, essential to their continued success. At the heart of American cities, the rise in crime has become a worrying constant that poses significant challenges both to public safety and the perception of stability in these metropolises. Despite the fact that some national statistics show a general downward trend in crime, cities like Baltimore, Memphis, and Philadelphia experience persistently high rates of violent crime, including robberies and assaults. In cities like Chicago, Philadelphia, and Baltimore, homicide rates have reached levels not seen in decades. The causes of this phenomenon are varied and include lack of economic opportunities, easy availability of firearms, the deterioration of family and community structures, and growing distrust in institutions. Despite efforts to implement police reforms, the situation continues to worsen, leading to a mass exodus of citizens seeking to escape the violence. The gang problem also persists, posing a constant threat in many cities. Clashes between rival groups over control of territories and drug trafficking have escalated, impacting not only the most disadvantaged areas, but also neighborhoods that were once considered safe. The lack of effective intervention by local authorities has left many communities at the mercy of these criminal organizations, exacerbating the situation of insecurity and hopelessness in the affected areas. The response to this growing insecurity has been multifaceted. On the one hand, the increase in criminal activity has led to a tightening of policing policies and an increase in funding for public safety. However, this approach has been the subject of intense criticism and debate, especially with regard to surveillance tactics and the militarization of police forces. In addition, gun violence in cities like Chicago and Los Angeles remains a serious problem, fueled by illegal arms trafficking and deficiencies in gun control laws. This situation has driven community initiatives that seek to address the root causes of violence, promoting early intervention programs and economic opportunities in neighborhoods affected by crime. In this context, cities are also exploring community policing strategies, which focus on strengthening relationships between law enforcement and the communities they serve. This approach aims not only to improve the effectiveness of the police response, but also to regain public trust in their protectors, a critical dimension in managing security in any democratic society. The combination of these approaches underscores the complexity of the problem and the need for solutions that are both immediate and sustainable in the long term, capable of restoring tranquility in urban areas, while respecting the rights and dignity of all people involved. The healthcare system in major U.S. cities has been under increasing pressure, especially following the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Pre-existing gaps in access to healthcare have widened, disproportionately affecting the most vulnerable communities. In many urban areas, healthcare remains expensive and difficult to access for those without adequate insurance, increasing health disparities between different segments of the population. One of the most evident problems is the saturation of emergency services in hospitals in large cities such as New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. Public hospitals often face not only an overload of patients, but also a critical shortage of medical personnel, leading to long waits and lower quality care at the most critical times. This situation has led many healthcare professionals to demand better working conditions and more resources in an effort to prevent the system from collapsing. The education system in major U.S. cities is facing a crisis that is profoundly affecting students, educators, and communities at large. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed a series of structural weaknesses in the school system, exacerbating pre-existing inequalities. Students in urban areas, especially those from low-income families, suffered the consequences of prolonged school closures and the abrupt transition to online learning, resulting in significant educational gaps and a generalized loss of knowledge. These inequalities in education are not only manifested in access to resources, but also in the quality of teaching. Schools in urban districts with less funding tend to have dilapidated facilities, less access to technology, and teachers with higher workloads, which directly affects students' academic performance. In cities like Detroit and Baltimore, dropout rates and low levels of achievement in reading and math have been cause for alarm. Furthermore, the education crisis is compounded by teacher shortages. Many teachers, exhausted by the demands of teaching in times of pandemic, have chosen to leave the profession, resulting in a lack of qualified personnel in urban public schools. Efforts to retain educators have included salary increases and additional benefits, but these incentives have not been enough to address the underlying problem. Faced with these challenges, some cities are implementing innovative solutions. Intensive tutoring programs, educational technology, and partnerships with nonprofit organizations have become key strategies to try to regain the ground lost during the pandemic. Despite these efforts, much remains to be done to ensure that all students, regardless of their socio-economic background, have access to a quality education that prepares them to face the challenges of the future. In short, the education crisis in U.S. cities is an urgent problem that requires comprehensive and multifaceted attention. Without an approach focused on equity, the education system runs the risk of leaving generations of students at a disadvantage, which would perpetuate economic and social gaps in urban areas. The infrastructure of major U.S. cities is showing clear signs of deterioration and lack of modernization, jeopardizing the safety and quality of life of millions of people. The aging of roads, bridges, and public transportation networks has become a central concern for urban planners and policymakers. In cities like New York and San Francisco, the need for renovations and repairs is increasingly urgent, as transportation systems are not only inefficient, but also unsafe in some cases. One of the most pressing problems is the state of bridges and roads, many of which were built more than half a century ago and no longer meet modern safety standards. The collapse of bridges in cities like Pittsburgh has highlighted the urgency of repairing aging infrastructure before more tragedies occur. In addition, traffic congestion worsens due to lack of proper maintenance, which not only affects mobility, but also contributes to air pollution and environmental degradation. Public transportation, a vital pillar for millions of people in large cities, also faces a crisis. In places like Washington, D.C. and Boston, subway and bus systems suffer from chronic delays, outdated infrastructure, and a lack of investment in new technologies. This has led to a loss of confidence on the part of users and has prompted many to rely more on the use of private vehicles, aggravating the problems of congestion and emissions. Despite these difficulties, some local governments are taking steps to modernize their infrastructure. Investments in sustainable transportation, such as expanding bike lanes and improving electric transportation systems, are beginning to gain traction in cities like Portland and Seattle. In addition, the federal government has launched large-scale initiatives, such as the multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure plan that seeks to renovate roads, bridges, and telecommunications networks across the country. The urban infrastructure of the United States faces a critical moment. The deterioration of roads, public transportation, and other essential systems represents an immediate challenge to the daily lives of citizens and to the long-term competitiveness of these cities in the global economy. Efforts to modernize these infrastructures will be essential to ensure safety, improve mobility, and meet the environmental challenges of the coming decades. The environmental impact on major U.S. cities is a growing concern that has intensified in recent years. With rising global temperatures and more extreme weather patterns, cities are on the front lines of the effects of climate change. These effects not only threaten urban infrastructure, but also exacerbate public health problems and deepen social inequalities. One of the most visible challenges is rising sea levels, which threaten coastal cities like Miami, New York, and San Francisco. In these areas, rising seas, combined with more intense storms, are causing more frequent and severe flooding, affecting thousands of residents and causing billions of dollars in damage to property and infrastructure. In response, some cities have begun to implement adaptation plans that include building flood barriers and relocating vulnerable communities, although these efforts are still insufficient in the face of the magnitude of the problem. In addition, rising temperatures have turned cities into heat islands, where the concentration of buildings and roads trap heat, raising urban temperatures above surrounding rural areas. This phenomenon not only affects the well-being of citizens, but also generates a greater demand for energy for cooling, which in turn increases greenhouse gas emissions. In cities like Phoenix and Los Angeles, heat waves have become more frequent and deadly, impacting especially the most vulnerable populations, such as the elderly and low-income people who lack access to air conditioning or adequate shelter. Air quality is another major issue related to urban environmental impact. Emissions from cars, industrial plants, and buildings contribute to the formation of smog and other pollutants that affect the respiratory health of city dwellers. In places like Los Angeles and Houston, polluted air has become a public health problem, with an increase in cases of asthma and other chronic respiratory diseases. Faced with these challenges, many cities have begun to take steps towards environmental sustainability. Some, like Portland and Seattle, have invested in green public transportation, renewable energy, and the expansion of green spaces to mitigate the effects of climate change. However, these initiatives require greater funding and a long-term political commitment to truly make a significant difference. The question that now hangs over the future of major U.S. cities is whether they will be able to recover from this decline, or whether they are destined for continued deterioration. Only time will tell, but one thing is clear. The American dream has turned into a nightmare for millions of people in these urban centers. If urgent and effective measures are not implemented, the future of these cities seems increasingly bleak.